Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Burning Questions, and the topic that set the internet on fire this week is why is NATO so scared of Russia? And joining us today to discuss this subject is Linas Linkevičius. And Linas, please introduce yourself so our audience knows who you are in case, I doubt they might not, but if they don't, it'd be great to hear from you.
Well, in short, I'm currently ambassador to Sweden, and before that I was Minister of Defense, Minister of Foreign Affairs. So that's, in short, my introduction.
Amazing. Well, so I guess we can start from a very burning subject. There was a drone that accidentally, a Russian drone, fell in Latvia and it carried explosives. And at this point, I guess the world is wondering, do NATO standards apply to anything? Do they ever enforce any of the statutes that are in NATO? And why do missiles falling in Romania, in Poland, in Latvia at this point do not constitute any sort of NATO response other than, oh, well, I mean, I'm sure Russia didn't mean it. It was an accident, and it's not enough to reinforce our sort of response to it.
I do understand your question because I'm asking the same questions myself. So, frankly, since very beginning, I believe this inaction or late actions, we can explain why, because you probably know we need consensus in NATO on any decision, any action, anything. It takes time. Now, NATO is still considering. Let's hope these later accidents were not deliberately conducted, but nevertheless, it needs some reaction. So, in my view, since very beginning of full-scale aggression, the public diplomacy was not very successful, in my view, needless to say, about actions. When NATO was repeating a few times per day that will not engage, that was understood by Russia like a green light, in my understanding, to do whatever they need. And NATO will not engage. So NATO will not engage, it's also clear, but it doesn't mean that NATO should do nothing as it appeared to happen. And in the beginning, I was also publicly saying that NATO must at least consider possibility to secure humanitarian corridors. If you remember, we all remember when refugees were fleeing and it was very dangerous for them, or to consider possibility to protect sensitive sites like a nuclear power plant, which is definitely if something would happen, so borders will not matter, and this is also understandable for everyone. Now I can tell that, as you said, these incidents or accidents, they are repeatedly taking place. It's not first time happening, and even if it's not deliberately, this is dangerous, and in my view, NATO should at least consider possibility to introduce no-fly zone in the territory of Ukraine, close to the border of NATO, because we need to secure our territory. So very simple. But again, I would repeat, we need consensus, and some countries are hesitant, some are too cautious, and these explanations are, as you all probably know, and this word's becoming, for me at least, and probably for you as well, a bit toxic. Escalation, provocation. So, in short, that would be something what I would tell you, and I will not defend this position to act or not to act rather. And this is definitely true. So we have to draw some lessons from what is happening, and sometimes delay of our decisions. Maybe it's not so far damaging NATO, but it's definitely causing damage and even victims from Ukrainian side, which is not acceptable by far.
Well, I think it enables Putin in a lot of ways because, it's kind of like if you continuously keep crossing rules and boundaries many, many times, whether it's on accident or whether it's deliberate and no one's reacting, you're sort of, you get a mental note that, oh, no matter what I do, it's going to go unanswered. For instance, one of the other questions that I would love to know your opinion on is the fact that international law seems to not be applicable to Russia because, as you know, I'm sure Putin recently visited Mongolia, which is a country signatory to the Rome Statute, and there is a warrant from the International Criminal Court, Putin had to be arrested the minute that he touched down on Mongolian territory. But he had a lovely little visit with all of the national traditional dances and performances, and Ukrainian flags or anything in support of Ukraine was removed as to not bother him, and he was not arrested. So at this point, we have these two very big situations, and the third one we'll talk about later. One is NATO seems to be scared of Russia instead of vice versa, and NATO seems to continuously showing Russia that they're scared of it, which is not a great strategy. And the second thing is, why do we need international law if it doesn't apply to Putin?
Again, good question, and I would say it's not the only example you're mentioning. Rome Statute, it's just one thing, but there are others. And when we're talking about this complete event, so we know that this is Mongolia we have in mind, which is definitely a very difficult geopolitical and geographical situation, squeezed between two big powers, totally dependent politically, economically, with regard to the supplies and so on. So for them, it's really difficult to be independent, so to say, and to act like this. But it was good occasion for Putin to show that international law not working because there are no sanctions. The best we can do, or those members of Rome Statute can do, to discuss this issue and maybe to appeal to Mongolia to comply with the commitments, and that's it. So, and by the way, the same situation with regard to other international organizations. If we look into UN Security Council, we are all talking, sighing that it's not possible when a country aggressor has veto right and institution not even able not just to act, but even to pass decent resolution because of veto right. And this is becoming a problem. So to repeat every time that this is not acceptable, not enough. Somebody should take lead, to take initiative to change something. And that somebody, I believe there are, first of all, big powers, G7, if you wish so, or also somebody else, because when the UN was created after World War, it was intention to prevent the next World War, basically, and to make sure that there's some kind of legal mechanism in the world where everybody will follow and will comply. And nobody could guess that one of the P5 members will become aggressor itself, and not just instead of standing on guarding security in the world, attacking and annexing territory of neighboring countries. So it was difficult to envisage, but now when we're looking to the UN Charter, it's impossible to change anything because we need consensus of P5. So it's not just Rome Statute, what you're saying, but also other organizations. We have problems in the EU. We have some countries which are acting against EU policy. And again, no mechanism to expel. We have, you mentioned NATO, so it takes time to take decisions. It's not easy, but sometimes one voice against can stop all process, be it financial, be it political, be it military. So these examples showing that when everything is perfect and everything is fine, so we are happy to enjoy all these international organizations, but when time comes and we have problem like this, or war like this, we are unable to do anything. So this is the situation where we have to admit at least that this is a problem to be solved.
Well, I think one of the key issues, and I don't know if you'll agree, but I assume you will, is that these organizations and their doctrines were written at the conception of these organizations when the member states were not over 30, but they were 3, 5, 7, maybe under 10, right? So that it's easier to reach a consensus with a veto or with some members, with all members having veto, and it's easier to reach a consensus when there are less people at the table, right? But the more countries you add, the harder it is to sort of operate in the with the strategy of either one or all, and you can't really vote, you can't have the majority, you just have to have all of the members agree, and it's really hard to do. So would you agree that both the doctrines of the EU and NATO and the UN need to be reformed because they're quite a bit outdated for the modern world, I guess, and for the amount of members that they have at this point accrued, and provided, Ukraine is now trying to join, Georgia is trying to join also. I guess that these organizations with doctrines with veto rights and rather alliances with doctrines with veto rights and alliances that have this, a majority consensus are a little hard to enforce, because at the time at which a country enters the alliance, they might be a perfect democracy and everything is good and jolly, but that's a democracy, right? We can see it with the United States right now, where there potentially will be Trump, which United States is not a member of the EU, obviously, but it is a member of NATO, and that's a problem because Donald Trump shows all the signs of being a wannabe dictator, in layman's terms. Then there is also Viktor Orban, then there is also Fico in Slovakia. So, at the time at which these countries joined these alliances, they were very different countries with a very different rule of law, same as Turkey and NATO. At the time at which Turkey joined NATO, it was prospering into a democracy, and now, well, it's really hard to say that it is. So would you agree that reforms need to happen and these doctrines and these rules and regulations need to change?
I can repeat, definitely, I think so. And that should be, first of all, it's not enough to agree that this is a problem, but something should be done in order to go out of this stalemate situation. So far, I do not see any efforts to do that. And again, Lithuania can take a lead, maybe Ukraine can take a lead, but should be big powers should take a lead because they can make a difference, basically. And you're quite right. Now we are considering, especially, for instance, in the European Union, there are some proposals to change the decision-making process, introducing qualified majority voting for some issues like sanctions, like enlargement, for instance, EU missions, which is now we need consensus for that, and we know how long it takes sometimes to introduce sanctions because of veto of some countries. And this implies that we need really to change something. In UN, we have to change substantially something. And actually, we also have to understand that, by the way, it would be a right question, is democracy willing and able to defend itself? When autocracies are pulling ranks, consolidating power, taking decisions as we speak, at the time we speak, they do not need any time. And we are endlessly discussing, we're endlessly trying to seek for some kind of dialogue, which looks like a nice process, but at the same time, when we're looking from the side of autocracies, or let's say more concretely from the side of Russia, they're using this so-called dialogue as a smoke screen to do nothing, to change nothing, not only in actions, but even in rhetoric. And that means this is really not a democracy, it's something else. So we have really, I'm not calling for dictatorship, but I'm calling to really very drastic revision of decision-making process, especially in the face of crisis, because otherwise we will lose. And not just we will lose, but democracy will lose. Liberal, so to say, democracy and rule of law system will lose in the world, and people will lose trust whether it's possible to reach something in the world. Otherwise, we can see that power arguments, or military power, to be more precise, arguments now taking over. You can change borders, you can change regimes, and you can deny countries of the right to choose. So that's the reality we have to face.
Well, exactly. I could not agree more with you, because I guess if we were to group the world into two parts right now, it would be, with the talk of the town would be NATO versus the axis of evil, right? And the axis of evil is not really an actual alliance, but it's a more direct and a more decisive alliance, pseudo-alliance than NATO has shown itself to be, right? I guess it's very interesting to see the power dynamics shift, because you've mentioned democracies, right? And you're not calling for a dictatorship, but in reality, a democracy represents demos, right? The demos in most countries wants Russia to be stopped. However, the leaders of those most countries, especially of Western Europe, seem to be erring on the side of caution through red lines and escalation and all of these toxic words that we've discussed earlier that have proven time and time and again to just be words inside of the minds of some of the Western European politicians and American politicians. And it's crazy to see how indecisive this big alliance that has been brought up to be this sort of peacekeeper of the world that enforces justice and the rule of law and defends countries from being invaded by autocracies is doing nothing. And then we see how, as you've mentioned, NATO and Western powers are discussing for months on end whether to give Ukraine missiles that are defensive, while Iran, for instance, is sending ballistic missiles in containers to Russia. North Korea is sending ballistic missiles. China is 100% selling Russia some gear that they could use in developing their own missiles, and everyone is circumventing sanctions, and no one cares about NATO response. So we live in a world where NATO is supposed to be one of the most powerful defensive organizations in the world, yet we continuously keep hearing we are scared from NATO, and we continuously, we shouldn't cross red lines, and we continuously keep seeing the axis of evil countries cross all the lines that would be bright red in any situation that isn't this. So I guess my question is why do you, as someone who has been in this in the world of NATO leaders and lawmaking, why do you think that is, and why do you think NATO is so scared of pushing onto Russia?
I don't think it's scared. It's too cautious, I would say, and maybe it's not understanding that inaction is provocation. When one can see that provocative actions or provocative statements, I would say vice versa. If you are not acting when you need to act, this is provocative. And this is also escalatory if you are restraining your own actions, basically. And these red lines, which were put, endless red lines, they were put by West themselves. Nobody else was saying that we shouldn't provide tanks, we shouldn't provide HIMARS. I will not repeat, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Now, there are very strange, illogical restrictions not to allow Ukraine to hit targets inside Russia with long-range weapons provided by the West. It's no logic at all, by far. And basically, it's also a bit cynical, I would say, when some experts are concerned that Ukraine is not advancing sufficiently, at the same time knowing that they have no superiority in the air, they have no, again, long-range artillery, they are not allowed to use all weapons efficiently to hit, I would stress, military targets in Russian territory, and at the same time, like in the box, they're not allowed to hit somebody in the face, but other side doing that. Same as playing soccer or football, whatever you can call it, and the other team is using rugby rules, and then we see the situation. So I'm not calling for unfair game, but just I'm calling to take adequately the situation, which is not done. And we are having this business with the power, which ignoring international law, which mocking international law. Rome Statutes is one of the issue, but I would remind you, and also selective approach to international law. I would remind you, CFE Treaty, if some still remember conventional forces in Europe, when they, on the eve of aggression against Georgia, simply suspended participation in that treaty, and that was because it was not acceptable for Russia. They also have treaties with Ukraine on border or whatever, but they're ignoring because they think this is not good for Russian interests. So you can have no deals with a country like Russia, no agreements, because they simply will not fulfill. They only can follow arguments of power, basically, and those tangible, visible, seen on the ground. And this is the only way. So here it should be understood by organizations also like NATO that this inaction doesn't mean cautiousness. It means definitely allowing positions for aggressor to take when you will need even more efforts, resources to change something. And by the way, it's also financially very detrimental. The country being destroyed in our eyes, and somebody should rebuild, and who will rebuild? Not just Ukraine itself, but also Western countries should support. So also the same price. Not talking only about victims of humans, which one is too many, but also talking about financial damage.
Yeah.
And this is not yet understood so far. So I really cannot add more to the skepticism, which is in your questions. I'm simply talking that myself quite often, and this is not acceptable what we do have, and definitely this is the case.
Well, it does seem, you've mentioned that sort of Western defense leaders are confused and upset that Ukraine is not moving at the pace at which they expected or wanted, right? I think what Ukraine did is sort of like a fallacy to our own good. When I had my first job, the first big girl job, I overperformed quite a bit. Let's say 100% was required of me and I was delivering 200, right? I was working very late hours. I was producing things much faster than it was supposed to happen. And at some point at which I burnt out and I started working a little over the capacity of what was required of me, my management was like, wait a second, you're underperforming now. And it's like, no, well, I'm performing to the capacity of the resources that I have. I was overperforming earlier. So I think Ukraine, having shown before that we can take back Kharkiv, we can take back Kherson with basically our bare arms and some little weapons, showed NATO that, oh, we don't have to try that hard. They will do it for themselves. But the thing is, at this point, we're expected to take back all of these regions and we're expected to sort of like defeat Russia within a click of fingers without any backup and without any superiorities in any region, because we were lucky enough and we had the momentum to do it once. But in reality, it's sort of like, it's funny to see, both people in different countries and defense leaders in different countries judge Ukraine and kind of grunt at the fact that we're not moving fast, while we're promised 50 tanks and we get 10 and we get them 3 months later than we were promised. We were promised F-16s for a year now. They were supposed to be here last year and then it kept being delayed and delayed and delayed. And you can't plan in order for you to plan defense or offense, you have to know what you have. And when you plan for certain things and they're just not there, you can't do it. Right. With that, I guess I will shift into a little bit of a different conversation. So I know that the Baltics, and I don't mean to, group Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia into the Baltics, but in general, in terms of consciousness and living next to Russia, I guess a group can be formed, have always been advocating as part of Eastern Europe to the Western European leaders about the threat of Russia. And I'm aware that up until 2022, the interests of Eastern European countries in Europe and in NATO have been just completely disregarded and just sort of like shoved under the rug and not taken seriously. Do you feel like the conversation has changed now? And do you feel like, well, I guess in your case, Lithuania is taken more seriously when explaining their experience with Russia and with what threat Russia poses within the context?
Yes, situation changed substantially, definitely, when we compare. And I remember when during my tenure in office, when we were discussing first sanctions against Russia in 2014, there were no voices supporting our position to include somebody from decision-making process in Russia. It was again saying that it's too provocative, we have to preserve channels of communication, and so on and so forth. It was understandable for many that this is a problem, but it will go by somehow. It's not related to us personally. It's not related to our way of life, so to say. And this is not detrimental to our country, to speak more concretely. And that's not considered like this anymore. And now I'm speaking from Stockholm, and for instance in Sweden, which is one of the richest countries, quite secure, had no war for more than 200 years. And they changed their position substantially, joining NATO because of this full-scale aggression. Yeah. And this is the main reason why they made this decision. So now it's understood that this is definitely a risk and threat to them, to this country. That was not before. I'm asking myself why you didn't make this decision after 2008, when Russia occupied 20% of Georgia. Why in 2010, when we were discussing NATO strategy, it was proposed to call Russia a strategic partner. It was 2 years after occupation of 20% of sovereign country of Georgia. And there was big enthusiasm to continue this partnership and cooperation with the country aggressor, which really going ahead because it was not stopped. And again, this example showing that situation a bit changing, but it's not enough. Again, as I said, and you mentioned yourself, I couldn't understand why still considering this limitations to use weapons, and I hope it will come. And again, it will be a bit late. Last Ramstein meeting, when President Zelensky took part in personally, and he made a plea to allies to fulfill promises which were done during the last summit. which is delaying. Delivery of equipment is delaying, and at the cost of lives, basically. And this is also should be understood. This is not just chess game, moving, so to say, and sacrificing something. You are sacrificing live people, and this is a big difference, and that should be taken very seriously into account. So we should understand that Europe and US, and in addition, if we are talking about G7, more than half of the world's economy, and we cannot introduce devastating sanctions to Russia. We cannot produce sufficient equipment. It will be 5% of defense budgets of some big countries. The war will be over, but it's not yet over. And again, I will repeat, you know yourself that everybody can agree that that Ukraine must win, that victory also should be defined what that means, victory of Ukraine. And I'm always saying that it's not taking Moscow. Ukraine are not going to take Moscow. It's business of Russians themselves. If they would like to get back to the civilized world, they have to change something in their own country, own capital in Kremlin, and that's their business.
I mean,
Ukraine would like to
get back to
wash, so to say, their territory from Russia, and this is a big difference. And there's no threat for existence of Russia. What some mouthpieces of propaganda talking in Russian programs. This is not about that. So it's something different.
Well, get back to the civilized world is also a very loud statement when it comes to Russia, because when was the last time Russia was civilized? Before. You
always wish something, which is maybe achievable.
Maybe at the time it was called Moscovia. I think it's not even get back to the civilized world. It's become the civilized world for once, right? I guess, one of the things that I guess both of us can agree on is, a couple of things that I suppose we can agree on is, one, all of these organization statutes are very outdated. It kind of feels like we're living in a joke Simpsons episode where, Russia is on the Security Council. There has been multiple evidence provided that there is no doctrine of such that that Russia could have succeeded the Soviet Union in the seat, and it occupies it illegally, and even that is not enough to take Russia off the Security Council. Russia is one of the largest aggressors in the world right now, and they still have the veto power, and they still stay on the Security Council, again, despite the evidence that it's not even legal for them to be there. And another thing is, I think one of the biggest problems that we've had in the West, and it's kind of fixing itself a little bit, but not really, right? Based on when I speak to Western leaders and Western academics and Western minds, there is still this treatment of Eastern Europe as like these little brothers, kind of adopted children, where we don't necessarily know what we're talking about. Like, it's good to listen to us for some things, but when we say things that we have experience with and that we're very, very aware of, and we're warning the world, and then it turns out that we were right, we're still kind of not credited with it, and Western experts deem themselves a lot more qualified to deal with everything they haven't dealt with before than the countries that actually have. So for me, the fact that Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, everyone has been, Ukraine, Georgia, everyone has been dismissed and completely not listened to for like 20 years. And now we're here. We are still not quite being listened to. And there is the next 20 years of Western experts still thinking that they're superior and still thinking they know better. And I wonder, where is the world going to be then? Because we've seen what it looks like when no one listens to us. And now we're selectively being heard. So I wonder what is going to happen to the world if, Western European leaders and North American leaders don't wake up and don't finally start giving us credit, voice, and actually, taking us as experts in the very thing that we, live right next to.
No, by words, it's changing. And many coming, and not just politicians, but also journalists, and saying quite bluntly, we didn't listen to you, we were wrong. So tell us now. Okay, we agree, we were right, they were wrong, and they were not listening. Now they are listening more, but again, I will repeat, they're not acting accordingly. So it's not enough to agree by words. We should provide actions. And this has changed, situation has changed, it's not the same. And you're quite right, we were quite kind of problematic small countries, always raising these problems which are not in reality, in some eyes of others, not existing. but now they remember that it was true. And I can provide you one example, for instance. NATO summit in Bucharest in 2008, I was present, I remember. It was a speech of Putin during NATO-Russia Council. And by the way, he was criticizing NATO leaders on the cooperation with Ukraine. I said, it's 2008, right? He said, with whom you are cooperating? It's not a country, it's some artificial creation. And you are spending resources, money, political capital for cooperation with nobody. And that was a big surprise around the table. And Prime Minister of Denmark, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the future Secretary General of NATO, he spoke on behalf of all NATO leaders and said, Mr. President, it's not the way we're talking about our partners. And during the break, they were looking at each other. And what did he say and why he didn't say? Maybe we might misunderstood or whatever. And there was a handful of us. They're saying he said because he means that. So in few months, by the way, war started, not against Ukraine at that time, but against Georgia, because they felt that this is green light for them to act. So now when we're reminding all that story, it's becoming clear. And but one difference, which is really helping to understand us and also helping to act much more than before, you would agree, even when we are saying that it's not enough weapons, not enough support, but it's by far much more than it was some time ago, right? So it's definitely something which is coming, but with delay, but it is coming. So at that time, there was no even intention to do something more concrete. So we can criticize or complain that we are still not understood sufficiently, but things are moving, and I'm convinced all these restrictions will be lifted and deleted, but again, unfortunately, at the expense of big victims, which are sacrificed not by those who are so-called strategically planning the process, but by those who are fighting as we speak.
Yeah.
And for them, it's not a big, coming back to the first part of our discussion, maybe for them it's not a big incentive that NATO is so proud about its unity, so proud about our power. But when you have an organization like new Ferrari in garage, moving not moving out of the garage, and not showing any of strength and beauty, and this is really a problem, and we have to ask ourselves what we are doing when in our continent. By the way, it's not Africa, with all respect or with all compassion and empathy to the conflicts taking place in these continents, but we're talking about Europe. So this is Euro-Atlantic area, and we should really fulfill our kind of commitments ourselves and to ask ourselves why we are not acting to prevent these conflicts, or if we are not acting to prevent, what we are doing in order to mitigate, at least to compensate something which was done before. So now I'm really far from satisfaction of what we are doing, and definitely this is something time of kind of reality. We have to take it very serious.
You know, you said that at the Bucharest summit in 2008, there was this sentence said that he says it because he means it. One of my favorite things to always bring up in this type of situation is there was a compilation of videos that was just like the cherry on top of the cake. And it was Putin talking about how he's not going to invade certain places and how Russia is not going to invade certain places. And it was like 2013, just because the West says we're going to invade Crimea doesn't mean we're going to invade Crimea. That's crazy. It's garbage information. It's just some crazy talk. Then invasion of Crimea, just because we took Crimea doesn't mean we're going to take Donbass, because that's just some crazy talk. The West is like crazy. They're just garbage information. Then he takes Donbass. In 2022, obviously the same type of situation with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And then the last one is him saying, oh, the West is saying we want to attack NATO. Crazy information, garbage. This is just the West making it up. And then it ended with to be continued, because it's kind of the same pattern. Of course, he's clearly not going to invade NATO with tanks and arms. He has been invading NATO with information and with propaganda, and and EU and installing leaders or helping install leaders or helping them stay in power, because war is not just tanks. War is also information, especially in 2024. But I guess to conclude this conversation, and I hope you at least had a laugh with this little compilation I've mentioned, but what do you what do you think we should all collectively do as Western countries with Western mindsets in order to finally sort of put an end to this reign of terror of Putin and to finally show him that he should be scared of us, not vice versa?
If in short, we shouldn't be allowed to led ourselves by false expectations, by wishful thinking. We have business with the country which is not just rule of law, which is not normal country. They're not acting according to laws, according to agreements. And all these words should be also taken, I shouldn't say with a caution, but they should really not taken seriously. And as example, a cynical statement of Lavrov a few days ago when he said that they never needed foreign lands. They do not need that. They simply need to treat people properly. So, but when you say you occupied and annexed part of the territory, they would say they didn't annex it, they liberated, say their land. And to treat people properly means just to protect these people, but at the same time they're killing these people. And by the way, mostly Russian-speaking population, by the way, let's mention. So it's definitely upside down, everything. Words, language, meaning, and it's time for the Western colleagues to understand that we have business with somebody else. Then you should understand as a partner where dialogue based on some rules. There are no rules, just power arguments. And by the way, these arguments should be provided as we speak now, not in 2 years. It should be done now, and we have to take very seriously our capability to act when we need to act.
Yeah, you cannot expect reasonable reactions and reasonable actions from an anarchist state that has a Napoleon complex, that's for sure. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time today and discussing this issue with me. I hope that we've provided a lot of clarity and a lot of new information to think about for our viewers, and I hope to have you here again if you will. And I know you have to go, so I will I will let you go and not hold you any further. Thank you.
Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam slava. Well, that was me with burning questions. We're supposed to put out fires, but I think with this discussion we lit some fires, and I'm expecting the internet to be discussing them for quite a while after this video airs. And for that to happen, I have a job for you. Please do not forget to like this video, give it a comment, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel because there are many more videos like this coming, and we work tirelessly to bring you all the information and explanations we can. I will see you next week with some more fires that I'm hoping to light on the internet. Bye.